Back in, I guess it was 2017, late 2016, as this transition into the Trump era began, many of us started talking about creeping authoritarianism and hypernormalization, and how we really needed to sort of keep our guard up about these slow moves, attacking press freedom and fighting against rights that we believe to be and know to be integral to what the United States is sort of founded on, and on and on. There were some who said, everything's fine. You don't really have to worry about it. But we now are at a point where historians who are taking a sort of broader look at what the last 4 to 5 years of the Republican Party have done and have represented, historians are increasingly horrified by the Republican Party's very direct march towards authoritarianism. And I want to look at a couple of articles that look at exactly this. There's an interesting article by Ben Jacobs in Vice called "The Republicans' Off the Rails March Towards Authoritarianism Has Historians Worried," where the article says, last week, Senate Republicans successfully blocked legislation to create a bipartisan commission to investigate the failed push on January 6th, which resulted in 5 people dead and over 400 people arrested. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, one of 7 Senate Republicans to support the measure, expressed her disgust at her colleague's vote. Are we going to acknowledge that as a country that is based on these principles of democracy that we hold so dear, and one of those is that we have free and fair elections and we respect the results of those elections and allow for a peaceful transition of power? I kind of want that to endure beyond just one election cycle. And this is a concern that is echoed by more and more scholars who study American history and the rise of authoritarianism around the globe. While republics are often fragile, they see the United States in a unique position as a mature democracy at the point of fracturing. As Harvard political scientist Stephen Levitsky, co-author of How Democracies Die, put it bluntly, I think we are headed for a crisis. Many scholars say that fracturing is without historical precedent. Levitsky's co-author Daniel Ziblatt from Harvard writes, a mainstream Democratic Party, that's small d Democratic Party, one of the major parties in a country going fully off the rails, the radicalization and increasing authoritarianism of the Republican Party is what is to blame. And the book argues American democracy is not inherently exceptional. The norms that hold it together were rendered vulnerable by the rise of former President Donald Trump. The underlying assumption when we wrote the book was that an important, even a dominant faction of the Republican Party was committed to the democratic rules of the game, but that no longer is the case. The GOP over the past 4 years, and far more quickly and far more thoroughly than I expected, has become a party capable of stealing an election, willing and potentially able to steal an election. And I would not have taken this seriously when we wrote the book. This is how the creeping hypernormalization works. You say, well, yeah, okay. I mean, they're trying to suppress the vote kind of casually, and this has been going on for a while. They tried it in 2008 a little bit, and they tried it more in 2012, and then more in 2016, and then it went completely crazy in 2020, and they're just going to try to keep doing more of it. But each little step, we're now at bamboo fibers during an audit in Arizona 6 months after the election, and much of the country supports it. More than half of Republicans don't believe Joe Biden really won. Look at how far we've come. And as I've said before, if I had given you the list, if on November 15th, 2016, before Trump was inaugurated, I gave you the list of the things we would see in 2020, even I would have hesitated and said, a lot of this just doesn't seem plausible. And yet it happened. There's another very interesting article in Common Dreams called Our Entire Democracy is Now at Risk Because of Republican Attacks, warn more than 100 scholars. This is by Jessica Corbett, a staff writer at Common Dreams. And this also points out that more than 100 scholars of democracy put out a joint statement of concern, calling on Congress to combat ongoing Republican attacks on voting rights and ensure fair and free future U.S. elections with federal legislation. Published online by the think tank New America, the scholar statement comes as Republican lawmakers nationwide continue to propose and enact state-level voter suppression bills. So what I think is important here to keep in mind is we don't want to be hyperbolically fear-mongering, but we have to resist the normalization. These are scholars with a wider view than many of us who look at right now and the last 2 years and the last 4 years and the last few presidents. When you take a view that is the last 100 years in the United States and the last 100 years around the world, and that is your area of expertise, as it is for many of these historians, and they say, we are starting to see signs in the United States of the Republican Party looking more and more like these hyper-nationalist, authoritarian regimes as they have become historically around the world. We need to be listening to that. And of course, the right is going to say, oh, come on, David, that is just liberal academics trying to scare us because they want Democrats to win. Read their actual work. Dig into some of these. Check out, we're linking to the Vice and the Common Dreams articles. Check out the citations. Do the work, and you will very quickly see that, if anything, we are not ringing the alarm enough about this issue. We're going to continue covering this and have more about it, but it is a seriously scary thing that is going on at this point in time. This is exactly why, I wanted to mention, this is also, there's a reason why we have separation of church and state, because in history, when there is not a separation between church and state, it often points to the exact type of authoritarianism that we are now seeing. Now, much of what is going on, Trump, he claims to be religious. He's not a religious guy. He had the assistance of evangelicals and the more religious nuttery that we saw within the Republican Party, people like Ted Cruz and others. But when you don't have separation of church and state, we've seen really bad things happen. When you don't have separation of military and state, we've seen really bad things happen. And so we are seeing this happen in a sort of different context. But I do think it's important to remember, the idea now of the coup that Michael Flynn said should happen and that Donald Trump is reportedly saying he'll be back in power by August. I don't think it can happen without help from the military. I don't think it's a realistic possibility without help from the military, but it doesn't make it any less horrifying that there are people openly talking about it. And that's an important aspect of this to remember as well. If you ever feel like you just don't have enough time to read all the books you want to read, you have to check out one of my favorite apps called Blinkist. Blinkist takes thousands of popular nonfiction books and distills each one down into an ebook or audiobook that you can get through in just 15 minutes, where you're getting all the key takeaways from the book. Just imagine how you'll be able to expand your horizons and knowledge by being able to soak up all of the important insights from 10 different books in an afternoon. Obviously, it's perfect for exposing yourself to a new book you otherwise wouldn't have time for, or you can use it to revisit a book you've already read, or use it to preview a book before you buy the full version and read it. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.